Ames Hartford was a man obsessed with status, power, and image, a self-made billionaire in his own eyes. Though his father had handed him the reins of Hartford Innovations on a silver platter, he lived in a luxury Manhattan penthouse on the 59th floor, decorated in cold steel and glass, like the inside of his heart. For James, everything had to be perfect. His coffee, his meetings, his schedule, and even the way the air smelled when he walked into a room. Anything or anyone that fell short of his expectations was considered a threat to his throne. That included people who worked for him, especially those he believed were beneath him, like the housekeeping staff. Marissa Delgado had worked for the Hartford family for over 20 years. She had been hired by James' father, a man very different from his son. The elder Hartford had treated Marissa with dignity and even friendship. He'd often sit with her while she polished the floors and asked for advice about stocks or travel destinations. But after his death, everything changed. James inherited the company, the penthouse, and the arrogance that came with it. He rarely acknowledged Marissa except when he wanted to bark orders or complain about trivial details, like a missing teaspoon or a crooked towel. That Monday morning, James was agitated. The company had hit a rough patch. Share prices were dipping. The press was whispering about leadership failures, and there were rumors that new investors were eyeing the boardroom like vultures circling a wounded lion. He was on the phone, barking orders to his assistant and yelling at legal advisors about some non-disclosure leak. Dressed in a $1,000 tailored suit, he stormed through his penthouse like a general preparing for war. Meanwhile, Marissa, in her plain gray uniform, moved quietly through the space with her dusting cloth and mop bucket, minding her business, as she always did. She was used to being invisible, and on most days, preferred it that way. But this was not most days. As she reached for a vase on the bookshelf behind him, her sleeve brushed against the edge of the glass, and a stack of folders James had placed on the coffee table earlier slid off and scattered across the marble floor. It wasn't a loud crash, but it was loud enough. James spun around like he'd been shot, his face contorted in rage. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" he snapped, ripping his Bluetooth earpiece from his ear and slamming it on the table. Marissa flinched slightly, but stood her ground. "I apologize, sir. It was an accident. I'll clean it up right away." But before she could finish, James walked toward her, his voice rising. "You think I care about your apologies? Do you even realize what's in those folders? Do you understand what's at stake here?" Marissa didn't reply. She bent down to pick up the scattered papers, her hands trembling slightly. James watched her for a moment, then said something that changed everything. "Get out. You're fired. Pack your things and leave. I'm done pretending to tolerate incompetence." Marissa froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Sir, I've worked for this family since before you took your first business class. I was here when your father built this company. Now you're not," James said coldly, cutting her off. "Go back to whatever hole you crawled out of. I don't need charity cases ruining my mornings." Marissa stood slowly, her eyes locking with his. There was no anger in her gaze, only calm, piercing disappointment. She placed the papers neatly back on the table, turned without another word, and walked toward the front door. James didn't watch her leave. As far as he was concerned, the interruption was over. He had more important things to worry about. That afternoon, James arrived at the company headquarters. He walked through the glossy glass doors, flanked by security and greeted by nervous employees who tried to avoid his gaze. The elevator ride up to the executive floor was silent, except for the sound of his Rolex tapping lightly against his wrist as he checked the time. He walked into the boardroom with his usual confidence, shaking hands with shareholders and nodding to directors. The room buzzed with tension. Something was different today. The chairs were all filled unusual for a Monday, and several unfamiliar faces were seated near the front. James glanced at his assistant, who avoided eye contact. "What's going on?" he whispered. "New investors. Big ones. They've requested to speak with the board directly," she murmured. James narrowed his eyes but said nothing. He took his seat at the head of the table, straightened his cuffs, and prepared to assert control. But before he could even clear his throat, the door opened again. The air shifted. He turned to look, and froze. There she was, Marissa. New uniform, new mop, no duster in hand. Instead, she wore a navy blue power suit with golden buttons and black heels that echoed with confidence on the marble floor. Her silver-streaked hair was pulled into a sleek bun, and she carried a leather-bound folder in her arms like it held secrets more powerful than any weapon. James couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was like a ghost from his morning had come back to haunt him in full color. She walked into the boardroom without hesitation, not even glancing at James. The room stood still. A few board members exchanged glances, but no one said a word. She moved gracefully toward the head of the table. His seat and calmly took the one beside it. Finally, she looked at James, offering the faintest smile. "Good afternoon, Mr. Hartford," she said smoothly. Her voice, once small and ignored, now carried the weight of something unshakable. James blinked. Once, twice, then a forced chuckle escaped his throat. "Is this some kind of joke?" Marissa didn't respond right away. Instead, she opened the folder on the table and slid a document across to the chairman of the board. "My name is Marissa Delgado," she said clearly, her eyes never leaving James. "And as of this morning, I represent the Delgado Family Fund. We've just finalized our acquisition of 51% of Hartford Innovations." The room exploded not in noise, but in tension. Sharp intakes of breath, raised eyebrows, and finally, the chairman spoke, confirming what she said. James tried to speak, but no words came. His brain scrambled for logic, for explanation, for control, but found none. The woman he had humiliated mere hours ago now sat in front of him as the majority stakeholder in his company. He looked at her again, this time not as a maid but as the most powerful person in the room. His world had changed, and he had no idea what was coming next. The air inside the boardroom was suffocating, and not just for James Hartford. It felt like the walls themselves had frozen in place to witness what was unfolding, as if time had slowed to give the moment its due gravity. James stared blankly at Marissa Delgado, the very woman he had kicked out of his penthouse that morning like she was disposable trash. Now seated before him, dressed in elegance and authority, her voice sharp, composed, and unmistakably powerful. There were murmurs from the board, low enough to be whispers, as eyes darted between Marissa and the official documents she had placed on the table, legal paperwork bearing her name, the name of the Delgado Family Fund, and, most terrifyingly, to James, the number 51%. It was the kind of number no CEO could ignore. It meant control, dominance, and decision-making power. It meant that Marissa, the once invisible maid, could now single-handedly approve budgets, fire executives, redirect company strategy, or remove James entirely. He forced a scoff from his throat, but even that felt dry and pathetic. This is insane, he stammered, trying to gather the frayed threads of his composure. "Who the hell do you think you are? Some janitor who stumbled into a pile of money." The room tensed. It wasn't just the insult, which was inappropriate enough in a professional setting, it was the desperation in his tone. Marissa, cool as glass, looked at him without blinking. "I am Marissa Delgado," she repeated evenly, her voice slow and cutting, "and I have never stumbled into anything. Everything I've earned with grace, patience, and discipline, 3 things you have clearly never valued." She turned to the other board members now, addressing them as if James didn't even exist. "For the last 20 years, my late husband and I made quiet investments, especially in underappreciated legacy firms like this one. When Mr. Hartford's father ran this company, he welcomed silent partners and respected old allies. He understood that humility was as valuable as innovation. After his passing, we continued to invest quietly, watching the company's path under new leadership." Her gaze finally returned to James. "And we've seen enough." James's throat went dry. He glanced helplessly at the chairman, then at the CFO, then at his own legal team. But they all wore expressions of diplomatic neutrality, forced poker faces that concealed either silent approval or helpless surrender. His voice cracked slightly as he tried to claw back the upper hand. "You were cleaning my floor this morning," he said, a whisper now, as if repeating it might somehow reverse the situation. "Yes," she said, without shame, without apology. "And while you were screaming about missing folders and threatening people who serve you, I was finalizing the purchase of the very company you think you run. I was in your home, not because I had to be, but because I wanted to see you, to see the man you've become. You confirmed everything I feared." James's mind raced. None of this made sense. How could someone like her have the resources? How did she go from dusting shelves to owning majority stock? And yet, there it was, on paper, signed, sealed, and registered legally, binding, and irrefutable. He couldn't attack the facts, so he turned to deflection. "This is a hostile takeover," he barked. Louder now, trying to reassert dominance. "There are protocols, procedures." "No," interrupted the chairman calmly, lifting the contract. "It's not hostile, it's legal, and frankly, long overdue. Your leadership has brought us dangerously close to collapse. The board has been considering new direction for months." Ms. Delgado simply acted before anyone else did. The word Ms. Delgado rang in James's ears like a courtroom gavel. It was the title of someone respected, not maid, not cleaning lady, but a woman of power, whose name now preceded decisions, whose voice could shape futures. James slumped slightly in his seat, a visible crack in the armor he had worn for years. For the first time, he looked truly vulnerable. A man who had spent his life stepping on people suddenly discovering that someone had been climbing quietly beside him the entire time. Marissa leaned forward slightly, just enough to command attention. "Without intimidation, Mr. Hartford," she said, her tone surprisingly gentle, "I'm not here for revenge. That would be petty. I'm here because this company has potential. It was built on integrity, family values, and bold ideas. You've traded those things for flashy PR campaigns and profit chasing." She paused, letting her words settle. "But I am willing to offer you a choice." James lifted his head, cautious, unsure if he was about to be fired or humiliated further. Effective immediately, she continued. You will step down as CEO. You may remain on the board in a consulting role, provided you agree to undergo leadership development and complete a full review of your practices by a third-party auditor. You will no longer make unilateral decisions. You will answer to this board. And to me, the silence that followed was deafening. James didn't speak. He couldn't. Every word caught in his throat like a jagged stone. The very foundation of his identity, his role as the big man, the alpha, the untouchable executive, was slipping from under him like sand. He wanted to scream. He wanted to protest, but he also knew this was the end of the road. The alternative, surely, was complete removal. Or, she added, her voice sharpening, you can reject this offer and resign. Entirely, the choice is yours. But no, this your reign as untouchable has ended. James looked down at the polished table, his own reflection staring back at him like a stranger. It was surreal. A mirror of a man who had everything but forgot to protect the one thing that mattered, his humanity. He glanced around the room, hoping for a lifeline, but there were none. The directors avoided his eyes. The CFO pretended to study the numbers in the folder. Even his assistant, standing near the back, looked at Marissa like she was the leader the company needed. James let out a slow, defeated breath. I'll take the consulting position, he muttered, barely audible. Marissa gave a small nod. Very well. The paperwork will be ready by the end of the day. Our legal teams will finalize the terms. It was over. He had lost the empire he thought he owned. Lost it not to a rival CEO, not to a billionaire tycoon, but to the very woman he had dismissed as nothing more than help. But what he didn't know, what none of them had known, was that Marissa Delgado had spent years studying people like him while cleaning floors. She had listened to conversations that revealed secrets. While emptying trash bins, she had read confidential memos. She had always been there watching, learning, waiting not with vengeance in her heart, but with vision. She hadn't built her fortune overnight. It had taken decades of disciplined investing, small stakes here and there, until one day, the right opportunity came, and today, it arrived. She stood up, gathering her folder, and nodded respectfully to the board. Thank you. Everyone will meet again tomorrow to discuss strategy moving forward. Dismissed. The directors began to rise, one by one. Some looked impressed. Others looked humbled. All of them now understood who truly held the reins. As Marissa walked out of the boardroom, her heels clicking with confidence, she didn't look back at James. She didn't need to. The message was clear, and he remained in his seat, motionless, staring at the empty chair beside him. His empire hadn't crumbled in a day. It had simply been claimed by someone he never saw coming. The woman who used to clean his glass tables now owned the glass tower he lived in. The final irony. He had built his world on disrespect, and in the end, it was respect earned, not demanded, that dethroned him.